I'd like to thank everyone for being here, both the folks in the audience and, of course, our candidates, for making the time out of their busy schedule to be with us for what we hope will be an enlightening and important forum. Let me first go over some rules, and I'm going to introduce our candidates and give them a chance to make an opening statement. We have all 8 candidates from the 4 races. They will be on the stage for the same time during the entirety of this forum. The questions will alternate who answers first, and we did a drawing right before we started on who is going to get the first question, and then the answers will move from left to right, and then for the next question, the person to the right will be the first one to respond to that question. Audience questions should be written on index cards. They'll make up the bulk of the questions asked. We do have folks who will be looking for you, so if you come up with a question during the forum, please feel free to put that on a card, hold it up, and one of our folks will take the card and get it to me. Audience questions cannot be directed to any one candidate. All candidates will get a chance to answer the question, so we ask that all the questions be addressed to all the candidates. If we could, for matter of time and everything else, we would ask you that no noise or applause as far as reaction from the candidates so that we can get as many questions in as possible. The time rules, each candidate will initially have 1.5 minutes to make an opening statement, and then for each question, you will get 1.5 minutes to answer that question. Don't feel obligated to take the entire 1.5 minutes if you don't want to. We do have timekeepers who will give you a 15-second cue. They're seated right here with the signs, and then a stop. So when you see the 15 seconds, get ready to wrap up, and when you see the stop, try to wrap up as quickly as you can out of fairness to the other candidates. And then following all of the questions, each candidate will get 30 seconds to close. And again, we give you those signals. I will tell you, I think our website said this would go to 8. We're going to try to extend it, start with the candidates, to 8:30. Does that work for everyone? Give us a chance to ask a few more questions. So we will plan to be here until 8:30. With that, let me introduce the candidates, and then we're going to go around and ask them to make opening statements. First of all, candidates for North Carolina House District 36. We have Lisa Parker. Baker. I'm sorry. That's my fault. Right. Lisa Baker, and I apologize. And Nelson Dollar. North Carolina House 37, we have Paul Stam and Jason Wunsch. North Carolina House 41, Jim Messina and Tom Murray. And then candidates from North Carolina Senate District 17, we have Tamara Berenger and Irv Portman. And with that, we'll start at the far end for his opening statements. This is not the order we'll take the questions, but opening statements with Mr. Portman.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everyone being here this evening. Thanks to the Apex Chamber of Commerce and the Center for Voter Education for this forum. Thanks to all of the folks who have come out. Too often in today's society, we don't have these forums. We don't have these opportunities where people have a chance to hear both candidates answer the same questions. And it's important in terms of making an informed decision. By way of background, my name is Irv Portman. I own a manufacturing business located right here in Apex. My wife and I started Westar 16 years ago in Holly Springs. We outgrew that facility. We produce aerospace components. So that's my professional background. I'm relatively new to public service. I volunteered to fill an open seat on the Cary Town Council in 2007, and then also stepped in to fill a seat for a friend of mine who was in ill health on the county board. I'll complete that term this year. The choice before us today is the same choice that our parents and our grandparents and their parents faced when they came to make a decision in voting in an election. What are the ideas? What are the thoughts? Tonight we'll have a chance to talk about that. I appreciate the opportunity to share this with you this evening and to hear your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Tamara Berenger.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us tonight. This is a very special honor. Many of you have heard a little bit about my background. I'm from a very modest background. My first home did not have indoor plumbing. It was in a little town outside of Charlotte, way outside of Charlotte, outside of Shelby, a little crossroads called Patterson Springs. What you may not have heard is that when I was 2 years old, my father's and mother's tobacco barn burned, and in 1960, insurance was not the custom. And so we went through in 1960 what many of you and many of our friends did just 4 years ago when the economy melted down, and we saw our IRAs and 401ks and some of our businesses get into trouble. The reason I'm running, I'm not a politician at all. I have my public service is elsewhere in Girl Scouts and other places like that. But I'm concerned because I want the people that have lost what they've lost over the last 4 years to have the same opportunities that my family did in 1960 to rebuild. And we need two things to do that. We need a strong educational system to retool and to make our leaders and business people and workers of tomorrow. And we need a strong economy to hire them. When we lost our tobacco crop in September, my father was fully employed by February by Celanese Fiber Industry, and he was able to work his way up into management and put 4 girls through school. I helped work my way through 2. And those opportunities, I'm concerned, are no longer here. And so I will work very, very hard to see that we reestablish North Carolina as a growing, strong, robust economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Murray.
Thank you to the Apex Chamber and the North Carolina Center for Voter Education for hosting this forum. I've had my own forum about 8,000 times when we've knocked on folks' doors throughout the course of this campaign. In 2010, we knocked on about 8,000 doors during a competitive primary and a competitive general election. And we've kept that tradition up throughout the 2 years, being very responsive to constituents. And I've earned the support of various organizations based on my record. A record of focus on job creation and improving the working environment for our school teachers. My mom was a school teacher, and one of the bills that I introduced this year dealt with reducing paperwork for school teachers, and it was a bipartisan bill. I worked with Republicans and Democrats across the aisle to get that legislation passed. And I've enjoyed my time in the North Carolina House. I found that organization to be extremely, there's a lot of folks who are very willing to work together on a positive vision for our state. And that's what I've been able to try to accomplish. And that's why the News and Observer said I'm an open-minded person who is connected to the community. That's my background as a pharmacist. That's my background as a former council member in Morrisville. And that's what I've tried to implement as a first-term member of the North Carolina House of Representatives. And I appreciate everybody here attending tonight.
Mr. Messina.
Thanks very much. Also to the Apex Chamber and the NC Center for Voter Education for having us tonight. My name is Jim Messina, running for House 41. And if you really want to know me, you need to know my little brother. My little brother Steve was born with cerebral palsy. And as such, growing up, we were never quite sure what he was going to be able to accomplish. You know, he was able to shoot a basketball real well, but he couldn't play basketball. But I'll never forget the night when we were sitting at Sunday dinner, and he reached into his pocket, pulled out a piece of paper, and he announced to all of us that he was going to go to college. Well, you know how he did that? He did that because there was a public education system that was there that allowed him to attend mainstream classes and also to attend special classes. There was a community college system that was there for him that allowed him to spread his wings further. And there was a public university system that allowed him to achieve his goal. And the great part about my brother's story is that he has now been a social worker, living on his own, paying taxes, and doing good for 20 years. All that good that was poured into my little brother is now getting poured into the community. What I worry about is that the cuts that have been made by the North Carolina legislature will make that dream less likely for kids in North Carolina. I want that dream for kids in North Carolina. But the cuts that have been made, both to teachers and to budgets, put that at risk. I also want to make sure we get back to funding our community colleges. The $65 million in cuts is unacceptable. As a small business person in the tech industry, we need to make sure that we have jobs, and those jobs are there for people with the skills who have them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Wunsch.
Good evening. My name is Jason Orr Wunsch, and I am running for the North Carolina House in the 37th District. I am a proud graduate of Mars Hill College and Campbell Law School, the law school that used to be in Bowie's Creek, that's now in Raleigh. And I grew up in North Carolina. I've lived here for over 25 years. I married my college sweetheart, who I met at Mars Hill, who was from Garner. And we have a 9-year-old daughter, Brooklyn. I live in Fuquay-Varina, and she attends Fuquay-Varina Elementary School. Upon graduating from Campbell, I opened up a law office, and I am a small business owner. And with my brother, we practice in many different areas. I am running because I believe that North Carolina deserves better. There's 2 areas that I'm extremely concerned about. One of those is education, as was just previously talked about, the cuts to our public schools, the enormous cuts to our public schools, the lack of teacher assistance, and the lack of children having the ability to get help. I'm also very concerned about our economy. I'm concerned about an unemployment rate that's at almost 10%. I think the focus of our North Carolina legislature needs to be on these 2 issues. I'm excited about serving this district, and I look forward to it, and I appreciate your vote. Thank you.
Mr. Stam.
Thank you, Graham. My name is Paul Stam. Some people call me Skip Stam. Right behind us here is Hunter Street. I've lived on Hunter Street for the last 33 years, and before that on Apex Barbecue Road. I've lived here now more than half my life. I have a family here, 7 grandchildren that live in or around Apex, so I spend most of my weekends taking care of them. It's a lot of fun. And I was greatly assisted having these grandchildren by my daughter, my son, and my son-in-law and daughter-in-law and my wife. My wife is the, you can't have grandchildren without children, Graham. They're a lot of fun. And my wife is the minister of music at Apex Baptist Church, and I'm known generally as Dottie's husband or my son's father. Some of you know what I mean by that. My education was in reverse order: Carolina Law School, Michigan State University, undergraduate in criminal justice. I took a lot of courses, the Armed Forces Institute when I was in the Marine Corps. I actually taught law, Jason, at Campbell for 1 semester when I was a child. I've been in the Assembly for 12 years. After 140 years of a Democrat majority there, I enjoyed being the majority leader for the first time. Thank you very much.
Mr. Dollar.
Thank you, Graham. I remember the night of October 5th, 2006. I was upstairs watching the flipping around on TV late at night. I kept seeing this ball of fire coming up, and I thought, there must be some fire somewhere way off. Turns out I started reading the crawl at the bottom, and it said Apex, North Carolina, and I about jumped out of my skin. The next day, I got on the phone with the mayor. The next day, I came down. The good first responders, the wonderful first responders in Apex, were tending to that. As many of you may remember, the EQ disaster and fire. The state people responded, federal people responded. Bruce did an excellent job there in the back, as well as all of our local and state people. But what we found out coming out of that disaster were there were tremendous holes in how we handled hazardous waste in the state of North Carolina. Things that many of us assumed were in place were simply not in place. And I was very pleased to be part of a bipartisan group that put together legislation in 2007, House Bill 36, and we passed one of the strongest hazardous waste bills in the United States. And I tell you that story because it makes a difference who you elect in the General Assembly. You want people who have the experience and the commitment and the ability to research the important critical issues and make sure that when we have tragedies, disasters such as that you get the response that you want by your General Assembly to make sure those things don't happen again.
Ms. Baker.
Thank you, Graham. Good evening. Thank you to the Apex Chamber and to the NC Center for Voter Education for having us tonight. I appreciate it so much. I'm a lifetime resident of North Carolina. Was born and raised in Franklin County, where I own a active farm now. I've lived here for 28 years in Wake County, and I was part of that EQ. My neighborhood was part of that. So I know very much what Mr. Dollar is talking about because we lived it. I have been a volunteer in our school, neighborhood, and in my church. And I also went to school at Atlantic Christian College and got a business administration degree. Professionally, I worked with water quality and the Department of Natural Resources and Community Development for 5 years, and went on to start my own business with Tupperware, where I actually helped over 100 people start their own business and transform their lives into levels that they wanted to be. I have 2 sons. One is a volunteer fireman, and the other is 14 and is at Lufkin Road Middle School. And then I've been married to my husband for 26 years. I've been in this race for 11 weeks. It's been a fast 11 weeks, but I have learned a lot, and part of why I come to this venue is because I want to be a voice for the people in this district, and I appreciate your support.
Thank you. We're now going to move into the questions. For those of you who may have been late coming in, if you have a question, you can fill out a card, just hold it up, and we have folks who will collect those questions. We will not get to all of your questions, obviously because of time, so we're trying to select the ones that we think probably represent the broadest interest. We'll try to get as many as possible. As I said, we did a drawing before the forum on who would get the opportunity to answer the first question first, and then we'll move from left to right, and then the next question will start with the person on the right. And the first person to respond to our first question is Mr. Wunsch. And then each candidate from left to right gets to answer. Are you in favor of examining the state regulatory structure and streamlining or eliminating regulations that impact small business for the purpose of promoting job growth?
I would be against regulations that would not promote job growth. I think that regulations should be limited to places where safety is a concern or an environmental issue is present, but I definitely would not want to create any extra burdens for small businesses in North Carolina. They are the core of our economy, and when we support them and we give incentives to them, our economy grows. And so it's obviously common sense that you would want to have regulations across the board for businesses that deal in toxic and dangerous things, but short of that, I would not want to burden small businesses with regulation.
Thank you, Graham. What is regulation? It's, aside from the statutes which your representatives pass, what we refer to as regulation is the stuff the bureaucrats, the rules they put together with rulemaking. I handed to most of you who came in before 5 till a 6-page paper, and at the second half of page 2 is all of the action we took with regard to regulatory reform in the last session. And if you want to get that electronically, we can send it to you with hyperlinks to all these bills, and you can read them for yourself. The long story short is that regulation was strangling our people. As I rode around the state, both in 2010 and this year, talking to people about why they're not hiring or why they're not expanding, taxes are a big issue, the rate of taxation, but by far the number one issue is overregulation. I'm going to give you 2 very quick examples. Before we became a majority, there was a move by the, I guess the barbers. They didn't like the competition from natural hair braiders. So they got a bill passed that natural hair braiders have to not only sign up and become a member of this organization, but also have to take 300 hours of training in natural hair braiding And if they do it without that, they are engaged in a criminal offense. This has to stop. I was going to give you a bigger example. I'll do it later. Read my paper.
Thank you, Graham. The answer to the question is yes. And in fact, one of the provisions that we put in the Regulatory Reform Act of 2011 is to require the agencies to do a cost-benefit analysis of regulations before they are put in place if they are going to have an economic impact on consumers and businesses. And this is the analysis that should have been going on for years, was not going on. We also put in there mandates to go back and look at all these regulations that are put into place and, have them reevaluated so that you can take off regulations that no longer make any sense. But I'll mention this too. We are taking, I believe, the proper approach to this, because in the bill that I mentioned in my opening, House Bill 36, there we put in place common sense regulations that we needed to protect our citizens, not only here in Apex, but across this state. So it's a matter of putting in the right regulations to protect the community, for the community good, and make sure that regulations involving business are just the ones that we need in order to protect consumers, to protect the public, but not regulations that overburden our businesses and do not allow small businesses to grow.
Well, as a small business owner, I know those regulations are very important for my employees. However, as a small business owner, you can have too much regulations. And if I go to the General Assembly, my plan is to listen to the community, listen to other small businesses, and align myself with other fellow legislators and elected officials to work toward what's good for the community and what is good for the small business. Otherwise, we're making decisions for people who we haven't talked to, who we don't know what their needs are. And at the end of the day, that is what we are there for, is to be a ear for the small businesses and the communities and the municipalities.
Mr. Portman.
I probably work in one of the most regulated industries in America. I manufacture aerospace devices and make medical devices. Those are two areas that are very highly regulated, and I think for good reasons. We can all understand and relate to the need for safe aircraft and safe medical devices. So I find the question an interesting one, and one that I think is too often a talking point without a lot of substance. I don't think there's anyone in public office that would ever want to not review an unnecessary or a needless regulation. I think we've heard that from everyone. Mm-hmm. Everyone's against unnecessary and needless regulation. But regulation that protects our employees in the workplace, I think is important. Regulation that keeps our air clean and our water pure, I think is important. Regulation that keeps our markets fair and open and competitive, I think is important. So the difference is, do we have the experience to be able to make those judgments of what makes sense and what doesn't make sense? That's really what makes good sense or not. I bring 30 years of experience running businesses, employing people, producing products that are sold on a global basis. And certainly, anytime anyone can identify a needless regulation, or maybe a regulation that outlived its useful life, we should always be open to eliminating it and streamlining it.
Thank you. I agree that we need to get rid of unnecessary regulations. The problem is that what we consider unnecessary and what others consider necessary is not the same thing. I consider the economic environment in North Carolina hostile to businesses. My husband and I have a small law firm, and we represent small businesses, and we've seen them struggle over the years with the cost of regulation. I consider regulation a tax. It's an insidious, hidden tax. Do we need regulations? Sure, there are some that we do need. I think we all can agree with that. The question is which one. I think that what we need to do is look at it from a cost-benefit analysis and also look at the unintended consequences. Sometimes these regulations sound like a really good idea, but when you think out through the consequences, not just the cost, but what we're going to be getting from them and what they're going to cause as a result, they're just not worth it. It's not worth the loss of jobs. It's not worth the cost to industry, and we have to start putting common sense into that consideration. Thank you.
In one of the recent gubernatorial debates, one of the points of agreement between both the major candidates for governor is a need to reduce the number of boards and commissions. Regulations flow from the boards and commissions that are in place in the state of North Carolina. Well, I'm chair of a committee called co-chair of a committee with a state senator who, it's called the Administrative Procedures Oversight Committee. And that's the committee which is going to reduce the number of boards and commissions in the state of North Carolina. It'll save our state money, and it'll help make regulations more common sense. So that's one piece of regulatory review. Second, we have a Rules Review Commission in place in North Carolina that helps review every regulation before it gets implemented. The Rules Review Commission needs to be given the authority to review all existing regulations to determine whether the need for those regulations is still present. We have regulations for many things that are beyond, that have gone by the wayside, technologies that are old, issues that are old. We can easily give the Rules Review Commission the authority to review those regulations. Once that review is complete, the third piece is we need to have a sunset schedule for regulations. And so those are three things that the senator and I, Senator Fletcher Hartzell, who is co-chairing that committee with me. Those are three things that we're looking at. We've already had our first meeting. I hope you'll stay tuned on how we're actually going to implement real regulatory reform in the North Carolina House.
I mean, as a small business person, I want to echo what others have said, that needless regulation needs to be eliminated. My whole campaign is about using data to make decisions. Therefore, there's a balance that needs to get struck in any decision that we make. Clearly, we need to make sure that this continues to be a great place to do business. North Carolina continues to be rated, and this area continues to be rated a great place to do business. We need to make sure that continues to be the case. We also need to make sure that we keep our air and water quality to a safe standard, and that we keep our workers safe. But beyond that, I don't see the need for regulations just for regulation's sake. That's silly. One of my concerns is when you talk about small businesses is some of what I've heard from folks is that we need to start laying taxes on service businesses. I don't think that's going to help small businesses here in North Carolina. And I'd like to hear someone respond to that about whether they're going to tax service businesses and as part of this broadening piece. But I think we need to continue to have this area be a great place for business and also a great place to raise your family. We need to make sure that, with things like fracking, that we only move forward with that when we're sure that it's safe. I don't think that means regulation. I think that means making good data-driven decisions.
All right, thank you. All right, our next question, we will begin with Mr. Stam. What would you suggest we need to do to improve our education system in North Carolina?
Several things. First, it's almost the only big profession in which payment to the people performing it is based almost totally on longevity and credentials rather than performance. Private business could not possibly operate that way, and yet we ask our very best teachers to accept lower payment just so that our average or less than average teachers can be paid the same thing. I strongly favor performance pay. As part of that, I am totally against tenure for teachers, just as like I don't claim tenure for myself. I'm in private practice of law. Any client I have can fire me tomorrow if they're not happy with my performance. Instead, we should have year-by-year contracts or 2 or 3 year contracts and get the educational payment system and performance system aligned with reality. Secondly, in more cases, the money should follow the child. That is, the school system does not exist for the benefit of the bureaucracy or the teachers. It exists for the benefit of the children and the parents. My time is up. I'll be glad to elaborate at my website, which you have there.
Let's wear it that way.
Come in this way.
Come in this way. Thank you very much. You know, the NAEP study that was done, nationally accredited study was done a couple of years ago in North Carolina and showed that over 66% of fourth graders were not proficient at reading and literacy. What an indictment of the education system over the years. Now, we have excellent teachers. We have the people that we need in place to make our system work for our students. But we've got to do some things. We've got to set some right policies. For example, we did in this last budget, we set a reading program in place in the budget that we're going to be expanding on next year. We have put forward the concept that we're going to end social promotions in the third grade. You need to be literate in reading and composition and mathematics before we just pass you on. We need to have at the middle school and high school level, and hopefully future Governor McCrory has talked about this, you need to be able to have more than one path. You need to be able to have a career path that leads you through what we used to call vocational training into the community colleges. There's a range of excellent jobs there. We also need a path that leads you to be a successful college or university student. We've got to keep our students engaged. We have brought down the dropout rate from 30% to 20%, but we've got a long way to go. Everyone needs a world-class education in North Carolina.
Okay. Thank you. Well, we've cut 6,000 jobs in our public school system. And they passed a bill for $30 million to get third graders to read. For one teacher in third grade to be able to be a reading teacher only, it costs $5 million. And we have 117 school districts, with Wake County being the biggest. Now, you do the math. It doesn't add up. And unfortunately, we need to restore full funding back to our schools to give our teachers that are there. I had a teacher forum last night, and they told me lots of things that they need and have had in the past and are having to do that they've never had to do before, and it is taking time away from our kids. And our kids is what's important. It's not if you've got an online book or a book on your table, or if you have somebody that can clean your room. You need to have somebody teaching your children. And so at the end of the day, I would like to see us go back as well for the older kids, not just elementary and pre-K, but for high school students to add vocational training for them, because not everybody is college bound. So you need vocational training for them to go forward and maybe have a small business as they go through, and they can eventually go to community college if that's what they choose. So I think we have a long ways to go on our education program to be very strong and be competitive in the future.
I think there are a few things that are critical when you look at the overall system, which is so important for our economy. Academic rigor is certainly something that needs to be done through curriculum. We need to ensure that that the rigor of our curriculum competes with the other industrialized countries around the world. We need to look at foreign languages. 20 years ago, it was common to have foreign languages in elementary schools in Wake County. Through 20 years, if we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't do this, it's almost gone. If it was important 20 years ago, it's more important today. Our kids and our grandkids are going to be competing in a global economy, and we need to be offering up the best. That starts with vision. It starts with leadership. Compensation is important. You know, you hear people say, well, you know, if money were the solution, it would have been fixed a long time ago. Well, that's just not true. It's a false and misleading statement. Money is part of the solution. And when you rank in the bottom of the nation, when you rank in the bottom 5 of 50 states, money is part of the issue. Priorities are determined by budgets, and budgets are determined by leaders. And leaders have those budgets either have a vision or they don't have a vision. And our society is affected by that. I'll share with you a short story, knocking on doors in Apex. I happened to talk to a lady who said, I'm upset people don't know what's going on. I said, what do you mean? She said, Sunday afternoon, I've got a master's degree, I've got 2 kids. I want to vacuum my house. I can't, because I forgot my vacuum in my classroom on Friday before I came home. And the reason my vacuum is in my classroom is because we cut the janitors out of the schools, and I refuse to let my students sit in a mess. That's wrong. This state is headed in the wrong direction because of these attacks on public education, and we need to put our values back into leadership. There are very few things government does to create jobs. One of it is education.
One of the things that I do day in and day out that gives me the greatest pleasure is I'm a teacher myself. I teach in the Keenan Flagler Business School. I teach law and ethics, and I work with about 120 students at any given day. So I respect our teachers. I love our teachers. I know how hard they work. What I want to know is if money fixes it, why does a starting teacher make $35,000 a year? When you do the math and it doesn't add up, we spend about $9,000 per student, and there are 22 students in that classroom. That's about $200,000 a year, and $35,000 goes to the teacher. We have to empower our teachers to teach, to inspire our children to learn, to love, to learn, and we're going to do it on $35,000 a year. My question is, where's the rest of the money going? Those of us who are business people know that if we ran our businesses where 25% actually made it to manufacturing and 75% was overhead, we were set for failure to begin with. I want to know where that money's going. I want to know why our teachers aren't paid more. I want to empower them to have a relationship with our students so that we can produce the students of tomorrow that will take on the world. We're competing with China. We're competing with Italy, with all the other countries in the world. It's not just South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia anymore. It's the world, and we've got to be ready, and I want to help do it.
The 2 experiences that I've had in my life that have helped form my opinions on the education system is growing up with a public educator and serving on the Wake Tech Foundation Board over the past 2 years. One of the things that Wake Tech does better than pretty much, I think they would be held up as a model, is listening to the private sector. What are the growing industries in our area? What programs can we develop to meet the needs of the private sector? That's the same kind of conversation that we need to be having in the K-12 system. We spend $1 billion in the university system on remediation. I'm going to pause. I'll pause there for a reason. That's a significant spend on remediation in the university system. So there's a mismatch between what's going on in K-12 and what's being required as a freshman in college. We've got to mold those 2 things together and make sure we're preparing our students to lead and have the skill sets that make them a productive member of society. I think vocational education is going to play a major role in this. I also think that we have to provide teachers a pathway for better compensation through performance. Right now, we only offer teachers the ability to get more compensation if they move into administration levels. That might not be the best pathway for a teacher. If they're a really good teacher and they belong in a classroom, we should reward their good behavior, keep them in the classroom, and get better managers for the administrative levels. And I think we'll have a better outcomes if that's the approach that we take.
So, I mean, I think first and foremost, the cuts that have been made to education have been shameful over the last couple of years, both at the K through 12 level and the community college level, and that has not helped. But with respect to educational reform, I think we need a balanced approach to educational reform. One of the models that I've been looking at, and it's not a perfect plan, but it's one that I'm looking at, is some things they're doing out in Colorado, where all the stakeholders got together, and teachers had to give some stuff up, administration had to give some stuff up, and they came up with a better way of handling the education system. One of the things about that is that standardized tests are not the answer. They're diagnostic tools, but they shouldn't be used as performance metrics. And, spending the whole year as a student working toward that multiple choice test, that one multiple choice test, is not a good way to measure anything. What we need to do is do, yes, some of that, but also have peer reviews by teachers, also have reviews by administration. We also need to make sure that we're instilling an environment that allows for creative work, that promotes the arts, and that makes sure that we stick with critical thinking skills. Because right now, those skills are falling by the wayside and really not setting us up for success in the real world. We need a system, I guess, what I want to say is we need a system where our long-term economic competitiveness is the forefront here. And the way we do that is by making sure we make smart investments in education based on data.
When you hear $9,000, it sounds like a lot of money. But when then you hear that $9,000 is one of the lowest amounts in this country spent on per pupil, that's shameful. We can and must do better. We must put our teachers' assistants back into the elementary school classrooms. Without these teachers' assistants, teachers are overwhelmed. They don't get the help that these children need who are behind. How can we ask, why can't children read, when we don't put teachers' assistants in there to help the students learn to read? I think the problem we've gotten to is we've stopped making public education a priority. We shouldn't be looking to privatize public education. We shouldn't be looking to take taxpayer money to set up schools that have no accountability. We must do better. We've cut $190 million from our public school system. We also can't forget our community colleges. This is what prepares our workforce. We've got to adequately fund our community colleges so that we can have a competitive workforce. And I would too agree that teachers being paid $35,000 is very low. And I believe that teachers should be recognized for the good work and the tremendous job that they do.
All right, thank you. Our next question from the audience, we'll start first with Mr. Dollar. North Carolina has the #1 resource of any state on the East Coast. If elected, how will you break partisan divisions and promote renewable energy? And when you vote to end the tax incentives that draw renewable energy companies to North Carolina?
Well, we passed, I believe it was Senate Bill 3 a few years ago, and I supported that bill to try to increase the use of renewables in a market-based way in North Carolina. And I think that on balance, that was the right approach to take to this issue. I think that we know going forward in the future that we're going to need to explore all of our energy options. We're going to need a broader mix of energy options, not simply in North Carolina, but nationally. And we have the potential for energy reserves some 20 miles off the coast. We need to take a look at that. We started to look at that back in the 80s. It was put off. Maybe we should have explored it appropriately at that time. We were looking at biomass, switchgrass. We've got a facility, the biofuels facility up in Oxford, North Carolina. We've got another outfit over in Greensboro working on those issues. There are wind projects that have sort of been off and on down in the eastern part of the state. Of course, you end up with some conflicts there, frankly, with some of the folks that are worried about migratory fly zones as well. So we, in building our renewable energy, we're going to need to do it responsibly in a market-based way that makes sense for North Carolina and does secure, and I agree with the what's been said nationally recently, that we need to be energy secure in North America in the next 10 years. It's vital for us, for our economy, long-term, to do that.
Okay. I agree with a lot of what Mr. Dollar says. However, as we go through this, we have to really look at what we have and where we are going to go with it, as municipalities, as a county, and as a state. Yes, we can go do offshore drilling, we can do wind farms, and there are a lot of things. And for me, I really feel like that until I get into the General Assembly and see what they have actually put into place, I really can't speak to it very deeply, because I really need to check that out and also talk to the people of the community to see where they are at this particular point in time in their planning, and then we can work together to move forward as a county and as a group together, because it affects us all. Let's just be fair. No matter what side of the ticket you're on, it affects us all, and we all want clean air, clean water, and I think that's what we need to work toward.
I think the key to all of this is the devil's in the details, of course. We're all for renewable energy. We're all for incentives that make renewable energy work and be more cost-effective. The key is, are the incentives appropriate? Will they get the job done, and are they too burdensome to the taxpayers? There's a demonstration project here in North Carolina to produce energy from hog waste. We produce a lot of pork in this state. That's an interesting idea. Does it make sense? Is it cost-effective? The devil's in the details. We need to look at it. I'll tell you one thing that I won't do that this legislature has done, and that's Senate Bill 709. Senate Bill 709 is a 14-page bill. You can Google it. It takes the Energy Policy Act that was approved 30 years ago, and it edits the word policy and replaces it with the word jobs about 50 times. Now, how do you create jobs? By changing a 30-year-old law and deleting one word and replacing it with another. It also guts the majority of the renewable energy focus that was in that bill. And it supports offshore oil drilling, which isn't controlled by the state of North Carolina. It's controlled by the federal government. And fracking. Now, I think that's not a good deal. I think it's not honest. I don't think there's integrity. That is my opponent's jobs plan, Senate Bill 709. It was passed last year before she's even in office. So I think that's an example of how we can go wrong and misguide people. Google Senate Bill 709.
Well, I take exception that that's my jobs plan. It is not. However, one thing I did hear in the question was working across the aisle, working together on things that really matter for North Carolina. Energy and education are two of them. I think you said yourself, it affects us all. And if we don't put aside our partisan differences and roll up our sleeves and get to work on those two issues, we're not going to get anywhere. I'm working very closely with Ann Goodnight on education and Caroline McCullen at SAS Institute. They've opened their research coffers to me to learn about this. And what I have learned is that education is a bipartisan, it's a people issue. It's a people issue. Energy is too, and that's how we're going to have to approach it. I certainly embrace investigating all energy because it is critical not only to our jobs, to our economy, but to our national security and to our state security. And so that's my position on both of those issues.
Energy wasn't one of the issues that I was planning on focusing on in my first term in the North Carolina House, and I met with a small business owner in my district. She and her husband started a solar development business based on legislation that was passed on a bipartisan measure in 2007, Senate Bill 3, which Representative Dollar worked on, and we got to know each other and started talking. And I developed legislation in a bipartisan fashion to help expand the solar industry in the state of North Carolina. It's unfortunate that legislation wasn't successful, but we started a conversation on things that we could do in North Carolina to help promote renewable energy jobs. And that conversation led to an award from the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association, where they named me the Legislator of the Year based on some of these efforts. And one of the ideas that came out of this is a concept called third-party sales, where if you use your rooftop to create solar energy and you've got other rooftops that are similarly situated, then you can create that energy and sell that to a neighbor. We're probably going to start with state-owned buildings. A great component to renewable energy is energy efficiency. We can create new energy, but if we use less, we won't need to create more. And if you've been to a state building recently, go look at how energy inefficient some of our state buildings are. It is a good investment for the state of North Carolina to focus on energy efficiency, and it will reduce our dependence and the need to create more energy.
So, I mean, I think we need to do more with respect to renewables and continue to make good investments in renewables. But again, it's got to be a data-based decision. It's got to make sense. My fear is that some of the decisions that have been made thus far by the legislature have been very ideologically based. If we take fracking, for example, what I see them doing is rushing forward with something that is ideologically based and may not have the data to support it. We need to look at what fracking has been, how it has impacted other states like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wyoming, Colorado. Make sure we understand the impacts there. Make sure that we've got an oversight committee in place that is going to make a data-driven decision around this, not one that is essentially industry regulating itself because all of the environmental voices have been removed from that committee. I think also we need to look hard at, what's going on with this fracking bill. It seems as though a lot of the major companies who might do fracking well in North Carolina aren't interested in coming here because there may not be the deposits and reserves to go after here in North Carolina. So we might end up with small companies coming in who may not do it as safely. I want to make sure we make data-driven decisions around environmental issues and around energy policy, and that we don't make decisions based on ideology.
I definitely think we would be deceiving ourselves if we didn't try to all work together on renewable energy. And as a legislator, I would be very open to hearing about all the different options that we have in renewable energy, such as the ones that have been mentioned this evening. I too agree that the research needs to be done into them in how effective they are. And I do think that incentives should be given to use renewable energy in our state. And finally, I would say that I think that we also have to be very careful, as Mr. Messina was just sharing, with the dangers that can be in place to our environment, to our water. Fracking can happen as close as Sanford all the way towards Apex. And we have to have measures put in place that will keep our water, our environment safe. So I would definitely be much in favor of looking into and using these renewable energy sources.
I'm a little bit skeptical of incentives, targeted incentives. Of course, one person's incentive that I get means other people have to pay more taxes. I mentioned at the beginning that I live on Hunter Street, and at the end of this forum, I invite you all to go to my house. Not in my house.
Dinner?
But drive by. Now, there's two reasons. One, I have 11 yard signs out there so you can find out how to vote for every office. But the second thing is, this was 30 years ago, I built the first passive solar house in Apex. And you'll notice glass all on the front. If you get closer, you see the trom walls and the earth tubes and the solar panels. And I thought that was the way of the future. And by now, there's probably half a dozen in Apex 30 years later. We were told then that if we had those incentives for just a few years, that the industry would mature and you wouldn't need incentives. Well, about 15 years ago, I did a little remodeling and got some more incentives. And we were told a couple of thousand. I didn't get rich off it now, and I didn't vote for it. It was existing. But we were told if we just had it for a few more years, the industry would mature, and soon we wouldn't need it. Well, you still need it. 40 miles off Manteo, we have an estimated 500 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. Let's go where the real energy is, where jobs can be had with a clean energy source, very low emissions, and stop fantasizing. Come to my house.
All right, thank you. All right, our next question, first Ms. Baker will answer this. What is your position on voter ID and why?
I am not for voter ID the way that it stands at this time. I feel that it does prevent some people from being able to vote. It's discriminatory to a point. However, we do have to show ID when we go to the doctor and do other things, and I think that that is more of a personal issue. Voter ID is taking care of your right as a citizen to vote. And by speaking of specific IDs that you can only have to be able to vote, that prohibits some of the elderly from going, some of the disabled people from being able to go. And I'm not quite sure how we guarantee the absentee ballots to be looked at with voter ID. So until I could research it a little more and understand what the community would want and what the voters think they need that would be the best IDs for them, I think that we need to reevaluate what is currently being proposed at this time.
I think for most of us, it's such a logical thing. We all have an ID. We all have a driver's license. We're accustomed to showing it at the airport. You know, we're accustomed to going anywhere and having to show it, so it's not a big deal. It would not be a burden for me to show a voter ID. But it's interesting, our grandparents and their parents and their parents and their parents never had this problem. They never felt a need for it. The founding fathers who created our Constitution said that voting is a right, and they went beyond that. They said it's a right that shall not be abridged. They meant that. Now, if we can find a way to give every single person in the state a voter ID without burdensome cost, that would be wonderful. If there's technology that can do this. We could retinal scan everyone, and we'd have ID. If we wanted to pay that cost, if that's what we felt we should do, there's lots of technology that will change. I quite frankly think this has been a solution in search of a problem. I'm willing to do it, but the first thing we need to do when we write laws is do no harm. So anything we can do to make our elections more secure without disenfranchising people, we should do. And as technology evolves, we'll find ways to do that.
I support voter ID. It is a right. It's also a privilege, but it is a right. Representative Stam introduced me to a gentleman who actually had turned up at the polls and someone had taken his right to vote. He showed up and someone had voted for him. I often get this question, well, there's no incidences of fraud. Why are we doing it? Well, that's why it's called fraud. We don't know how much of it is happening. Our right to vote is precious. I believe it should be protected, and I do believe in voter ID. I support voter ID.
In 2008, Georgia passed a voter ID law. It was a presidential election year. Voter turnout was the highest it's ever been. The projected cost of the legislation came in, I think, around a third less than what was projected. They provided free IDs to people to prevent, to make sure everybody had a chance to vote. No one got prevented from voting through that legislation. And like I said, turnout is a record high in Georgia that year. I think we can do it in North Carolina. It makes a lot of sense, very common sense, and it's not going to break the bank. And I don't think we want to have a reactionary government where we wait for all the fraud to be proven until we come up with a solution. How about we prevent the fraud first? And so I think it's pretty common sense. I'm a pharmacist. I've had to explain to so many people why do they have to show me their ID to get Sudafed. Now, Sudafed's not a constitutional right, but marriage is, and you have to show a voter ID to get a marriage license. And so I think we can do it. I think we can do it in a very common sense way. And whenever you see a poll come out and it says 70% of people agree on a given issue, it's probably a good idea to do that in a public way.
I oppose voter ID in its current form. You heard me tell my story about my brother earlier. He's someone who is disabled and can't drive. Therefore, he would need to go get an ID. He can afford one, but there are other people like my brother who can't. And I don't want to see their right to vote infringed upon. I think that if we were to go in a direction of something like this, where the technology could make it universal and easy and the cost wouldn't be prohibitive, perhaps someday we could do something like Irv was talking about. But I also think that the notion that we have a bill like this that does not include absentee voting is a mistake. I think that if you're going to look at the potential for voter fraud, in-person voter fraud is so rare. Let's look at all potential cases of voter fraud if we're really going to get serious about looking at that. I guess that's my view.
I am against voter ID in North Carolina, being required to show an ID to vote. We have to remember when we talk about voting that we're dealing not with the right to get into a club to show an ID, or even, as was said at an earlier forum, a governor's mansion. This is the right to vote, which I learned when I was at Campbell Law School a little over a decade ago, is a fundamental right. Our fundamental right to vote is one of the most important rights that we have. I am not in favor of doing anything to infringe upon a person's right to vote. And I think because it's a fundamental right, we have to put it on a scale. And we have to say, let's look at, is there rampant fraud going on in North Carolina? And is that rampant fraud strong enough to outweigh someone's right to exercise their vote? It's clear that there is not rampant fraud in North Carolina when it comes. If you're told there's rampant fraud, it's to scare you into thinking that we need IDs to vote. We have to remember that voting is a fundamental right. It must be protected, and that is why I do not support a voter ID bill.
Of course, you have a fundamental right to vote, but if you vote more than once, then you've diluted the votes of everyone else. I find it very ironic. Governor Perdue said the proudest moment of her governorship was vetoing the photo ID bill. Large majorities of Democrats are in favor of photo ID, and yet all these Democrat politicians are against it. It's also ironic, the day we were voting on the override of her veto, which was unsuccessful, put on my desk was an invitation to the governor's mansion that evening in which it said, photo ID required to come to my house. Now, you could drive by my house and you don't need any ID at all tonight. But she required it. I thought it was ironic, too. This summer, I saw an ad, Obama for America was advertising for volunteers, of course, volunteers to be paid a good wage, $9 an hour, valid photo ID required.
I think Skip has a lot of excellent examples there. I am for a strong voter ID law. It's common sense. It's one person, one vote. We need to make sure that that's the case here in North Carolina. And there won't be any denial of anybody's ability to vote. There's a provision in the law that we have recommended that allows a person, if they show up at the polls, they do not have a photo ID, they can vote a provisional ballot. They can still vote, and then you have time after the election, a certain amount of time, to verify your residency. So no one in any scenario would be denied the right to vote. And on the question of voter fraud, my God, look over here in Morrisville and Statesville, just within the last year, 2 cases in those 2 towns of voter fraud and manipulation. I can sit here all night and tell you stories from Wayne County, Durham County, Allegheny County, all across this state of situations of voter fraud that I've seen in the last 25 or 30 years. The public is right on this one. The public wants photo ID, and it's a common sense thing, and we should do it.
All right, thank you. We're now going to start with Mr. Portman with this question. As a legislator, you're often faced with voting on a bill that has special interest support. How would you go about making your decision?
Well, I think all bills have interest. Some interest is public, some interest is business, and, the term special interest is one that gets thrown around a lot. I think the key is you always need to ask a very simple question. How will this bill make our state better? How will this bill affect the lives of the people who live in our state? How will it affect the next generation? I think those are the questions legislators should ask. We have lobbyists that are paid by business to represent business. Our positions in the House and our positions in the Senate shouldn't be lobbyists. We shouldn't be advocates for doctors or for business or for energy. We should be advocates for citizens. Lobbyists have their job. And we have great businesses in this state that can buy the best lobbyists in the state to do their job. But these seats that we're competing for are seats representing citizens. So the answer to how do you deal with a special interest bill is you listen and you get all the facts. You listen to the lobbyists. They can be a good source of information. They understand the issues. But you also listen to citizen groups, you do your own homework, and then you make a decision what you think is best for the community.
I agree with you, Mr. Portman. We need to listen. As senator, I'm a senator now, I represent many of you. And one of the greatest joys I've had during this campaign is listening to you and what is important to you, gathering the information. I'm I guess a nerdy kind of lawyer professor. And before I make decisions, I check out the facts. I want to know as much as I can. And that means listening. You can't learn if you're not listening. As long as you're talking, you're not listening. And there are all types of sources of information. I've said over and over that I don't know all the questions. I certainly don't know all the answers. But as your senator, I will be listening. I won't always agree with you or any other particular person, but I'll always be listening and trying to do what is best for our District 17 and for the state of North Carolina.
I have a barometer on when I'm listening to someone trying to sell me on an idea or a piece of legislation or whatever the lobbyist or special interest is trying to. I ask them, what does the other side say? I listen to what they tell me. I go find the other side and say, this is what they're saying about your bill. Is it true? And if they lie to me, I'm never going to vote with them. And the reason why I do that is because I got two little girls. And I teach them, do not lie. You do not lie. It's a fundamental. How many lies do you have to take? I've had this conversation with my children millions of times. How many lies do you have to tell before you're a liar? One. And so I want them to look at their dad and see someone that they're proud of, and it helps me sleep at night knowing that if I can explain what we just did in the legislature to my 8-year-old and my 6-year-old, then I probably made the right decision. And so that's my barometer.
I mean, we need to serve the citizens. Just as Irv was saying, our focus has to be on serving our citizens. Leadership is about service, and we have to be focused on serving the people that we represent. We also must get facts. We must do our homework. We must dig into the issues and look at both sides. We absolutely have to be listening to everyone who comes to us with ideas and make sure we consider all those ideas and develop the best approach based on those ideas. My concern is some of what I've seen, and as I talk to people at the doors, some of what they say to me is they're really frustrated by the partisan politics that they see out there. They see people who are voting completely party line, and it seems like they're not an independent thinker. All they're thinking about is what the party is telling them to do. I don't think that is being a good representative. I promise to look at the facts, make tough decisions, and do what's in the best interest of the citizenry.
One of the things I learned very quickly after graduating from Campbell Law School was that to be a good lawyer, you have to be a good listener. Every conversation, I think, starts out, I'm a criminal defense attorney, starts out with, what happened was. And so you have to be a good listener. And at Campbell Law School, 3 of the most difficult years of my life, I spent learning to be analytical. I've never looked at anything the same after my 3 years at Bowie's Creek. And that taught me to be analytical and to look at both sides, that there's not just one side to a case. And I got that from a fine education there. These are the qualities that I would take as a North Carolina legislator. I think that obviously there's a lot of special interest that's going to be involved with bills, and you have to be a good listener. You have to decide for yourself and look at both sides. You cannot be closed-minded, and you have to come to a decision based on an educated decision. And so my training and experiences as an attorney for over the last 11 years, I feel has prepared me to be a good listener in this situation and to be a good legislator. Thanks.
I generally agree with everything the 5 previous have said, so I could just end it there, but I'd like to elaborate a little bit. You would be shocked. We vote on more than 1,000 votes in a session, important votes. On maybe 900 of those, we hear from nobody at all, except maybe the guy who sits next to us in our seats. Then there are the high-profile bills, maybe the lottery or Cherokee gambling, that we hear from everybody. So then you come down to just a few dozen every year where they're special interest. And really, the reason I'm telling you this is you can have a tremendous impact on legislation if you talk to your legislator. I don't mean a mass email. Those kind that are generated by the computers. You know what we do to those? Click, 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 delete, 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 delete. Right. And we collect your address and send you mass mail back in return. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about meeting your legislator in the district and explain what your interests and concerns are. And that will be more than anybody has ever talked to that person about that issue on most bills.
I think you can look at the record of the candidates. I mean, what bills have I been a primary sponsor for and have been successful at getting enacted? Annexation reform, historic property rights reform for the state of North Carolina. And that grew out of a citizens movement not only here, but all across this state. Mental health reform, that we passed 2 separate bills in the last 2 years of the General Assembly. That wasn't special interest. That's trying to reform our system to make sure that North Carolina can get rid of those gaps in service that we have in our mental health system. The hazardous waste bill that I mentioned that impacts citizens not only here in Apex, but across this state. Our workers' compensation reform bill that I was a primary sponsor on. In that case, we brought business and labor together. I mean, you had the heads of the North Carolina Chamber and the heads of the union come into the committee room saying, breaking bread together and singing Kumbaya. Now, how many times did that happen? So we can do those things. In the area of Medicaid that I've done a tremendous amount of work in, I don't know how much special interest thanks you get, but we made sure that we closed no beds in the last budget. We made sure that we kept all the optional services available to Medicaid patients and that we had no rate cuts so people wouldn't lose their physicians. So I have tried to work over the years on bills that have a broad impact for the interest of our citizens here in our district as well as across the state.
Well, I ditto all that for the most part. However, I've served on so many committees, volunteering from HOAs to church committees to in our school. You have to learn to put your opinion aside. You have to learn to advocate for the best of what you're doing, not necessarily what you believe, but what the whole group believes. And working as a team, because there is no I in team, we all are going to have to work together. And I think that's very important for us, because we go there because we are a citizen, put in a citizen's legislator to serve you. And you give us the ideas and the information that what you want is what we need to work toward. Do we always agree? No. Do we always know everything? No. But at the end of the day, if you're working for the best of the county and the state, you have done your job as a citizen and as a legislator.
Thank you. This is probably be our last question before we go to closing statements. We'll start with Ms. Behringer. Do you support Governor Bev Perdue's 3/4 cent sales tax increase?
I do not support the tax increase. In the future legislative session, we're going to be reforming the tax code. It's very important. North Carolina has a tax code that is outdated. It is a hodgepodge of different kinds of rules and taxes, and we need to come up with a system that equitably sets our economy back on fire so that our businesses can do the things they do, innovate, create jobs while they're doing this, so that we can then have the money to do the things that we need to do. By increasing taxation in any form without a unified plan to do so, we are only hurting our businesses, hurting our economy, and hurting our people. As I said when I first, in my opening statement, the reason I'm involved, the reason I want to be here is to help people get back on their feet, to have people who have lost everything or lost so much have those opportunities. For the students, who half of our graduating students from college can't find jobs. And the last thing we need to do is increase taxation without a unified system of reform. I believe we have enough money. We just need to figure out how to spend it properly and how to increase our economic growth. Thank you.
I do not support the 3/4 cent sales tax increase proposed by Governor Perdue. It's almost $1 billion tax increase. It's a job-killing tax increase. It's a regressive tax increase. And our public schools pay sales tax. So it's actually a tax increase on our public education system. I do not support it. I do not support it. There's a better way to reform our tax code, and we're going to do that and hopefully get started on that in this session. We inherited this session a $2.5 billion budget deficit cobbled together from one-time stimulus dollars from the federal government and one-time tax increases, temporary tax increases. Well, I kept the promise to keep those taxes temporary, and we balanced that budget without increasing taxes, without adding to government debt, and we were able to give state employees and teachers their first raise in 4 years. That's fiscal responsibility. That's what we did this year, and that's why I oppose that 3/4 cents, almost $1 billion tax increase.
There are almost $3 billion in tax loopholes and deductions that we should be taking a look at before we start talking about any kind of 3/4 cent tax increase, which is aggressive. I just think, that's something we are obligated to look at first before we start talking about our aggressive sales tax. I think that what we do need is to find money for education, make sure that we get our priorities in order, not provide scot-free tax breaks to people like the film industry when it's not required. Make sure that we're setting the right priorities for North Carolina, realize that education is the driver of the future and the driver of job growth.
Yeah, I don't support a tax increase where there are other ways to fund the things that we need. I think as a legislator, that would be one of the things I would want to look at is where we can make cuts, certainly not in our education system, but I understand that people are struggling. I understand that people are unemployed, that people are losing their unemployment, that we're at a 10% unemployment rate. We don't need anything at this point that's going to burden us further, and so before I would want to have a tax increase, I'd want to see how we could get around further burdening our small businesses, our public schools, and our citizens.
Jim is right on the point. Actually, there's $9 billion of tax preferences, some of which are justified and some of which are not. And before you would ever want to raise tax rates, you would want to look at those preferences. We have a little book here, Biennial Tax Expenditure Report 2011. Her reason for wanting to do this, and she wanted to raise it a penny in 2011. I'll talk about that because I got more details on that. That would have been a 20% increase in the sales tax rate. She's only a penny, but it was a 20% increase in the rate. And the crazy thing about it was this. She requested a certain amount of money for K through 12. After the entire appropriations process, we passed the budget and overrode her veto and gave her 99.8% of what she had requested for K-12. I mean, even Ivory soap isn't that pure. 99.4, right? This was 99.8, and I have 30 copies of the details on this I'll give you afterwards. And yet, the ink was not dry on that budget before she said we had decimated education. That made me think she really didn't know what the word decimated means. We had destroyed it. We had devoured it. You know, but she was just wrong. We had funded 99.8% of what she had asked for.
You know, I have to say, it's a bit of a wonderment to me. Now, our Democrat friends who are running for office here so far, and I'm not sure what Ms. Baker's going to say, have all said, oh, no, we don't want to raise the sales tax. But their leaders in the House of the Senate argued at every opportunity, in every committee, and on the floor of the House and the floor of the Senate ad nauseum about raising taxes. The Democrats in the General Assembly that y'all would be going to serve with want to raise those taxes. And we said no. And we said no because you cannot raise taxes on working people and seniors and folks on fixed incomes when they don't have a job, when they're struggling to make it. That's the worst time in the world to raise taxes. You know, it makes absolutely no sense, as a number of my colleagues have said. What we've done in the General Assembly is to set priorities in terms of education. We even had the NCAE begging the governor not to veto the budget this year, okay? So we set priorities. The area of the budget that's been most problematic, frankly, driving it has been Medicaid. I've been working on that for the last 2 years. We get stability in the Medicaid program, and we get our economy growing, we'll have the money we need to have the type of particularly the type of education system that we want here in North Carolina.
Well, we've got to get our economy growing. We've got to move forward. I'm not for a tax increase at this time because our economy is still just recovering. We still have lots of people who still do not have a job, who do not have resources at their hands. But I want to leave you with a thought. Cutting taxes equals cutting services. Now, do you think that's a good deal or not?
When I joined the Cary Town Council in 2007, I made a comment after I took the oath of office, and I said that as government officials, we have a responsibility to live within our means, and we need to respect the amount of money that people give us. And we don't have a right to ask for more money unless there is a clear and compelling public good. And it is our job to articulate that. So the short answer to the question is no, I don't support the 3/4 cent tax, but I want to go further and talk about something that this legislature did that I think is wrong. I'm a small business owner. I got the first $50,000 of my business income tax-free last year. It was very nice. Well, thank you very much. 7% tax rate, it's $3,500. Now, having a small business tax cut is probably a good thing to do. Having a small business tax cut and calling it a small business tax cut and giving it to every S-corp, every LLC, and every LLP, every lawyer, neurologist, cardiologist, lobbyist makes $1 million a year is not good policy. And it creates the problems that cause us to have to cut public services. Now, that's wrong, and what is really wrong is folks who label their actions as one thing and then do another. To label it a small business tax cut, just like calling it the Energy Jobs Act, it's just not transparent. When they were called on it, they said, well, they couldn't figure out how to do that, it would be too complicated. They actually voted against a motion that would have done it. That's wrong.
All right, we're now going to move to closing statements. Each candidate will get 30 seconds, and since we began the session on this end, I'm going to start with Ms. Baker, and we'll move that way with the closing statements. Each have 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to come tonight to answer your questions and to hear my opponents answer theirs, because it helps us to know where we're going regardless of who is there. And as a citizen in this district, I want to be your voice in this government and make government work for you. I'm Lisa Baker, and I appreciate your vote on November the 6th.
I thank you for being here this evening. It's been an honor for me to serve the citizens of the 36th District. I think everyone up here is committed to their ideals and committed to public service. But I would ask you, who has the experience, who has the proven record to best represent you and what you believe is important in the North Carolina General Assembly? I was very pleased that the North Carolina Center for Public Policy Research labeled me one of the most effective members of the House. I want to put my commitment to service and my effectiveness to work for you for another term in the North Carolina House. I'm Nelson Dollar. I would appreciate your vote on November 6th or before. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here. Mr. Portman complains about his small business tax cut. 2% of that goes to millionaires. 98% of it goes to people who are not millionaires. He would deny it to everybody just to keep it away from those bad millionaires. I appreciate your vote. I've served you for 12 years. I do my research. I hope you'll visit my home from the street. But more importantly, please visit my website, which is on my material, and paulstam.info, to learn all you want to know, good and bad.
I think that this is a critical time in North Carolina. We have an economy that's in shambles. We have unemployment rate that's well above the national average at 10%. It's time to focus on our economy. It's time to focus on putting people back to work. It's time to focus on our small businesses. And it's time to make public education a priority. It's not time right now to make our legacy social issues. It's time to concentrate on putting people back to work. People don't want to be unemployed. They want to be working. People want to have good public schools, and I'm committed to that. I hope I'll have your vote. Thank you.
So again, I mean, every year on my brother's birthday, I write on his Facebook page that my goal in life is to be half the man that he's become. And the reason I do that is because I understand that leadership is about service. So what I want to do is serve the citizens. I want to make decisions based on data, not based on ideology. I'm not going to toe the party line. I'm not going to sit there and use, I guess, the legislature to punish groups that don't agree with me. I would really appreciate your vote. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Well, thank you for giving me one of the most precious things that you can give someone, and that's an hour and a half of your time tonight, and I appreciate that. And I'm asking you to give me something that is equally as precious, and that's your vote. And you can vote here in this complex tomorrow, starting at 11 a.m. If there are questions that you have that haven't been answered, I would ask that you, many of you were handed one of these cards. I would ask that you write your question down, and please give it to me before I exit the building, and I will gladly try to respond to you in a timely fashion to help you be a more informed voter, because an informed voter is the most important thing in this electoral process. And I thank you for being more informed.
Thank you so much for coming tonight, and I also ask you for your vote. I have two issues, education and the economy. I'm a former PTA president. I have 3 children, 2 of whom are still in public school, 1 of whom has graduated from public high school. I'm a former tax attorney. Or actually, I guess I am still a tax attorney, but I don't practice much law anymore. I have special skills that I want to put to work for you in the North Carolina legislature. I ask for your vote, and I appreciate your time.
I guess I get to close this. My name's Irv Portman. I appreciate you being here, as we've all said. You know, I'm a Democrat. Half my friends are Republicans, half my friends are Democrats. We like each other. We don't fight and have a difficult time, and I think that's the way our country is. I think we need leaders that do the same thing. I think every single person up here is a good person who's willing to serve their community. We just have different views and different ideas. But that's why we have a Senate. That's why we have a House, to be able to go and discuss these things in a respectful manner. Listen to each other. Hear all the information and vote. Thank you for being here. You're now part of the 10% club because you spent more time than 90% of the rest of the people who are voting in this election. Thank you.
I'd like to thank all of the candidates, not only for your time tonight, but also running for office to serve Wake County. And I would also like to thank the audience for adhering to the rule. I'm now going to say, if you'd like to show your support and appreciation, you are now welcome to do so.
Right, thank you.
One bit of housekeeping, I do have a set of car keys up here to a Honda that someone found, so good night. Remember rightly, this was Brent had a good part. No, that is a good number of questions. Thanks, Jim. No, not a good page.